It was just like every regular day in the busy streets of Lagos, horns blaring, traders calling out, and people rushing to their destinations. Among the chaos, an old, slightly battered Toyota Corolla navigated through the city, driven by a man who looked like any regular taxi driver. But this was no ordinary driver. Inside the worn-out car sat Greg Williams, a billionaire whose name echoed in business circles across Africa. He owned hotels, real estate, and luxury brands, yet here he was, disguised as a struggling taxi driver. Why? Because after years of wealth and power, Greg had been heartbroken too many times. Women only wanted him for his money, fame, and status. He had been used, deceived, and left empty despite his riches. So he decided to take a drastic step, to become a nobody and find love the real way. One evening, after a long day of picking up random passengers, Greg stopped near a small restaurant in Victoria Island. That's when Ada entered his taxi. She was breathtaking, not in a flashy way, but in a natural, effortless beauty. Her brown skin glowed under the streetlights, and her deep eyes held a sadness he couldn't ignore. She wore a simple gown, her hair neatly packed, and carried a worn-out bag that suggested she wasn't wealthy. "Good evening, sir. Please, take me to Oja," she said, her voice soft but tired. Greg nodded and started the engine. As they drove, he noticed her staring out of the window, lost in thought. He couldn't resist asking, "Long day?" Ada let out a deep sigh. "More like a long life." Greg glanced at her through the rearview mirror, intrigued. "Want to talk about it?" She hesitated before finally speaking. "Men. They always come into my life, pretend to care, then leave when things get hard. I'm just tired." Her words hit Greg hard. He had been thinking the same thing, except in reverse. Women had always used him for his wealth. Here was a woman who seemed to have suffered the same fate. Curious, he asked, "So, what kind of man are you looking for?" She smiled bitterly. "Just a kind one. Someone who loves me, not what I can offer." Greg's heart skipped a beat. Could this be fate? That night, after dropping Ada off, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she spoke, the pain in her voice, it all felt too real. He wanted to know her more. The next evening, fate played its hand. He was parked near a supermarket when he saw Ada walking out with two small bags. Her face was tense, and as she struggled to balance her bags, one slipped, and a few oranges rolled onto the pavement. Greg didn't think twice. He jumped out of his car and helped her pick them up. "You again?" Ada looked surprised but smiled. "What are the odds?" Greg grinned. "Need a ride?" She hesitated but then nodded. "Yes, please." As he drove, their conversation flowed effortlessly. He learned that Ada worked as a receptionist at a small farm, struggling to support her younger brother's education. Life hadn't been kind to her, yet she remained hopeful. Greg found himself smiling more than he had in years. With Ada, there were no pretenses, no expectations, just real, honest conversations. Over the next few weeks, Greg continued picking up Ada after work. Their friendship grew stronger, filled with laughter and deep conversations. Ada liked him, but she assumed he was just a humble, hard-working taxi driver. One evening, as they sat in the car eating suya, Ada turned to him and asked, "Greg, what's your biggest dream?" He hesitated. How could he tell her he already had everything except love? Instead, he said, "To find someone who loves me for me." Ada smiled. "That's a beautiful dream." At that moment, Greg realized something: he was falling for her. Hard. But how long could he keep his true identity a secret? Greg had never felt this way before. With Ada, life felt simple, real, and full of meaning. Every evening, he looked forward to their drives, their conversations, and the way she laughed so effortlessly. But a storm was coming. One evening, as they sat in the car eating roasted corn by the roadside, Ada sighed deeply. "Greg, I need to ask you something." His heart pounded. Was this it? Had she found out the truth? "Go ahead," he said, forcing a smile. She looked at him seriously. "Why are you still a taxi driver?" Greg swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "You're kind, intelligent, and hardworking. I see the way you treat people. You could do something bigger. Why settle for this?" Greg sighed. "Not everyone is lucky to have big opportunities." Ada shook her head. "No. Some people choose to remain where they are because they are afraid of failure. I just don't want you to be one of them." Her words cut deep. She had no idea she was talking to one of the richest men in Nigeria. But Greg couldn't tell her yet. Not when she was finally seeing him for the man he truly was, not his wealth. But then, something unexpected happened. One night, as Greg parked in front of Ada's compound, a sleek black Range Rover pulled up beside them. A tall, light-skinned man stepped out, dressed in expensive designer clothes. He walked up to Ada's side of the taxi and knocked on the window. "Ada, I've been calling you. Why are you ignoring me?" Greg's chest tightened. Who was this? Ada sighed and stepped out. "Chuka, we've talked about this. I'm not interested." Chuka scoffed. "Not interested? In me? But you're riding around with this taxi driver." He glanced at Greg with disgust. Greg clenched his fist but remained silent. Ada crossed her arms. "Greg is more of a man than you'll ever be." Chuka laughed. "Really? A broke taxi driver? Don't be foolish, Ada. You deserve better." "I deserve love, Chuka. Not money. That's why I never choose you." Greg's heart swelled. Ada had just defended him without knowing who he really was. But the moment also reminded him he couldn't keep this lie up forever. The next evening, Greg made a decision. He had to tell Ada the truth. He picked her up as usual, but instead of driving towards her house, he took a different route. "Where are we going?" Ada asked, confused. "You'll see," Greg replied. Minutes later, they arrived at Williams Towers, one of the most luxurious skyscrapers in Lagos. Ada's eyes widened. "Greg, why are we here?" Greg parked and turned to face her. "Because I have something to tell you." He took a deep breath. "Ada, I am not a taxi driver. My real name is Greg Williams, and I am the owner of this building and many others." Silence filled the car. Ada blinked, trying to process the words. "Wait, what?" "I am a billionaire, Ada. I went undercover as a taxi driver because I wanted to find someone who loved me for me, not my money." Her hands trembled. "So, all this time, you were lying to me?" Greg's heart sank. "No, Ada. Everything I told you, everything I felt, it was all real. You are the first person to see me, not my wealth." Tears welled up in her eyes. "But you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth." Greg reached for her hands. "I was afraid. I didn't want to lose what we had." Ada pulled away. "I need time, Greg. I don't know what to feel right now." She stepped out of the car and walked away, leaving Greg staring after her, his heart breaking for the first time, not because of money, but because of love. Days passed. Ada didn't call. She didn't reply to his text. Greg was restless. Had he lost her forever? One evening, as he sat in his penthouse, his phone rang. It was Ada. "Can we meet?" she asked softly. Greg rushed out. He met her at their usual spot, the roadside suya stand. She was already there, waiting. He sat beside her. Ada. She held up a hand. Greg, let me speak. He nodded. She took a deep breath. I was angry. Not because you're rich, but because you didn't trust me with the truth. But then I realized, you had been hurt before. Just like me. Greg's eyes filled with hope. Ada smiled softly. I don't care about your money, Greg. I care about you. Greg felt a lump in his throat. So, does that mean? She laughed. Yes, you big fool. I love you. Greg pulled her into a tight embrace, tears in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he had found love, true, unconditional love.